question, Jeff, and I don't know if you had anything else to add to that, but the way that they're doing it, and you should know that I'm not in support of the current proposal, but the way they're doing it is basically cutting Medicare by about $500 billion. There are tax increases.
What would be the nature of the cut in Medicare?
Part of it's in Medicare Advantage, which about 12,000 Iowans have that type of a policy, and then just cutting reimbursement and holding down reimbursement to our hospitals and doctors, healthcare providers in the future. There are tax increases on businesses if they do or don't offer health insurance to their employees. There's an 8% tax if they don't offer those plans. If you don't,
in essence, it's a fine if you don't.
Right, and which is a huge. Why would you hire more people and give them raises if, in fact, if there's a percentage cost of doing that that's going to increase sizably as you try to grow your business? So it's we're trying to create jobs. We're in a recession, and this really goes totally against that. There is a tax on policies themselves to pay for this comparative effectiveness portion of the bill. There's an individual mandate that says that if you don't have insurance yourself, you're going to be taxed 2.5% of your income. It's basically taxes and cutting spending in Medicare. And obviously in a state like Iowa where our reimbursement is low to begin with, that is something that's going to be very difficult to withstand and maintain the kind of quality health care that we have in this state.
There's been a big discussion of whether or not there's rationing in this plan. What is your thinking about that?
Well, technically, I mean, they'll say no, but you have a board basically with this comparative effectiveness that's going to look at what procedures are more effective, which ones have better outcomes long term. Who knows what that information will be used for? It's the same type of board that they use in, say, in England, basically, and they do ration there as far as health care.
We do that now here in this country, both in the private sector and in the national. If there's some things we don't pay for, if the private sector says you have a pre-existing condition, or if you have a condition that's not covered, that in essence is rationing. The public doesn't pay for everything. If you show up at a hospital and you have specific kinds of requirements that require exorbitant or maybe exotic or even experimental forms of treatment, the public doesn't pay for those now. In essence, we're already doing some kinds of rationing of existing resources, both in the public and private sector, aren't we?
Well,
we don't call it that.
Well, there are cases, certainly in the private insurance, if something is not covered under the policy that you're purchasing, but there is a choice to purchase those types of coverages, too, where there would not be, if in fact you got into a system where there truly was rationing.
Right.
And I don't know if do you want to codify that? Do you want to put that in law to say that this benefit is covered, this one is not? You're going to basically leave those decisions, and what is in this basic plan is going to be decided by an unelected board. There will be no ability for Congress to have any input. And some people believe that's good or bad.
And as a matter of fact, there are 8, I think 9, I recounted this morning, 9 points in this piece of legislation that exempts itself from judicial review.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And that means that if you disagree with some board's ruling about a specific care, you can't go to a judge. You can't. I'm not sure if that's be my first choice anyway. But they have removed the scrutiny of the judiciary from how this is to be applied.
Right, exactly. It's going to basically turn.
Kind of cool, ain't it?
Well, if you're one of those people that sit on the board, I guess it is.
I'm just thinking if they can do this on this legislation, why can't you guys use that as a way to limit the judicial activism in a whole bunch of other ways?
If there's jurisdiction here, there should be in other areas also.
If that works for these guys,
right.
Why can't it work for you guys?
Yeah. I'm not going to argue with that at all, Jan. You and I would agree on that. But the fact of the matter is that, they say in the bill that there is no rationing.
Well, here's what the bill says. Let me just read a provision, and maybe I hope. See, this is why it's really good that you are here, because unlike Congressman Conyers, I don't think you require 3 lawyers to interpret this, right?
Right.
Right. So here under Section 1151, reducing potentially preventable hospital readmissions, exclusion of certain readmissions says, for the purpose of this clause with respect to hospital, excess readmissions shall not include readmissions for an applicable condition for which there are fewer than a minimum number as determined by the Secretary of discharges for such applicable conditions for the applicable period for such a hospital, which in other words means that if you show up too much with a condition, according to whatever definition is selected by the Secretary, right, they can say, well, you've been here once and maybe twice, and third time you're out.
Right. And
isn't that by definition rationing?
You could make that argument, absolutely.
Are we doing that now already, though, in some ways?
In the private sector, you can buy policies to do whatever you want, to have coverage for whatever you want to. You would not have that ability.
You can have whatever you pay for,
right,
in the private sector.
Exactly.
If we went to a single payer or if we went to a public option,
no one knows, because all the benefits or the base plan that would be put forth would be decided by this committee that will have Congress cannot intervene, the judicial branch can't intervene. What they say goes, and that's final.
Right. Well, there's a medical ethicist who works for Princeton University, and he's an animal rights wacko, by the way, and his name is Peter Singer. You've probably heard of that name. He wrote a think piece in the New York Times the other day, says why we must ration health care, and he was on CNN this morning. Here's what he said.
Firstly, it's the public part of health care that I'm talking about. I'm not talking about stopping people paying for whatever they can afford to pay for, or paying for whatever extra insurance they can pay for. But if you have public funds going for something, you want, and the taxpayer wants, to get good value for that public funds. Mm-hmm. So that means you're going to have to say, look, at the margins, if there's a very expensive new treatment or new drug that perhaps doesn't do any good anyway, perhaps there's no good scientific studies that show that it's really going to help you significantly, we're not going to provide that. We're going to say we want to get a certain standard of value for money, just like you would if you're shopping at the supermarket. Mm-hmm. That's rationing.
Well, that's what he's advocating. Value for the money. And at one level, that makes a lot of sense. But out here in the cheap seats, Grandma says that, hey, they're talking about me here.
Right.
And then they show up at town meetings and yell at Barney Frank, which is kind of fun.
The thing that really scares me is that you are going to destroy any kind of initiatives out there for research, for new breakthroughs as far as whether treatments or pharmaceuticals. You are basically going to take away any kind of potential new life-saving cures that might be out there, because exactly what this gentleman said.
We'll continue with Congressman Tom Latham right after our farm markets, and we'll go right to our phone lines here in just a moment if you can be patient at 284-1040 or 800-469-4295, broadcasting live from the Crystal Studios at the Iowa State Fair. Broadcasting live from the Crystal Studios, I'm Jan Mickelson. We're talking here at the studios with Congressman Tom Latham, who is, I suspect every place you go, the Medicare, Medicaid, health reform issue is probably number one, isn't it?
Well, it has been the hot topic. I will have to say, doing a series of town meetings back in July, this is kind of like, and people say the straw that broke the camel's back, but it's the big, huge boulder that broke the camel's back. But this has been building. When you go back to the $700 billion TARP bill, the Wall Street bailout, the $787 billion, quote, stimulus package,
the bonuses being paid out of the TARP money,
government takeover, General Motors of the financial industry.
And cash for clunkers. People are taking advantage of it even while they're whining about it. Right. How dare you give me this money?
Well, and cap and trade, where people understand that their utility rates are going to go up, 25%, 50 cents a gallon on gasoline.
Right.
But people are just very concerned about the size, scope of the federal government, the intrusion into the private sector, the spending that's going on. Jan, this year, 1 year annual deficit is going to be $1.8 trillion. That's more than the entire budget was back 1994 when I first ran for office. I mean, that's just the deficit. The budget that was passed this year is going to triple the national debt in 10 years. We will be paying in 10 years $800 billion just on interest. It doesn't do anything for anything other than to pay China. That's what we're facing, and that people get it. Sometimes the politicians in Washington don't get it. And the day before we left, I did what we call a 1-minute speech on the floor, and I looked over on the other side of the aisle and I says, "Don't you people ever go home? Don't you ever listen to your constituents?" And fortunately now, in August, they're getting an opportunity to understand what real America thinks of what's going on in Washington.
Well, many of, even some of our local politicians are, in Iowa politicians are carefully avoiding as many town halls as they can. They can't get away with avoiding all of them, but it gets pretty tense. And the people are getting confronted, and the other side is saying, well, this is all trumped up. These are all just fake, what do they call those things, artificial turf protesters?
Yeah. AstroTurf or whatever you want to call it. But,
yes.
I'd like to know where the people who are criticizing and calling people un-American because they stand up and voice their opinions today were 4 or 5 years ago when they would run 70, 80 people in pink shirts to my town meetings and yell and scream at me. But that was honest dissent then. But now these people are un-American because they come and voice their opinions. And that's, to quote Nancy Pelosi. But it is outrageous what some people think, and the demeaning, like the bit that you played with Barney Frank at the town meeting last night, to demean their constituents like that, to not have any kind of understanding of where these people are coming from, to be so arrogant. And to be somebody like Barney Frank really needs to go home and honestly listen.
He did go home.
Well, and he found it. But he wasn't listening. He was arguing.
All right, let's talk to as many people as we can, beginning with Phil. Good morning, Phil.
Good morning.
Hi.
Thanks for taking my call.
You bet.
The reason I'm calling is that if it's unconstitutional for our Congress to be involved in health care, why are the Republicans not just walking away from the table? Why are we negotiating with the Democrats over there?
Well, on the House side, there really hasn't been any negotiation at all. It's been a one-side run the whole, all the bills. I don't think they've gotten any votes on the House side.
And this morning, the Democrats said, "That's it. We're not going to. It's going to be even less than that. We're not going to negotiate at all. We don't need the Republicans. We're just going to do our thing, and we're going to do what we have to do. We're not going to compromise. We're just going to." Do what we said we're going to do.
Well, I mean, you've got to look.
They got the numbers.
They've got the numbers. They've got 60 votes in the Senate, which is enough to stop a filibuster. They've got 80 member margin in the House of Representatives. They can give a bunch of the blue dogs or whatever a pass to vote no, and then still push these things through. So that's the real concern. The only backstop to this is the American people. Right. And they have to stand up. If they don't like what they see going on in Washington, people better be vocal and get out there and let their opinions known.
Okay, thank you, Phil. Appreciate it. Now, a couple of days ago, Obama himself, President Obama, was at one of his town halls, and an unusual thing happened. A person stood up with actually some preparation and challenged the president. I want you to hear some of this. This is really kind of interesting.
How you doing, Mr. President?
I'm good. What's your name?
My name's Zach Lane. I'm a student at the University of Colorado in Boulder.
Good to talk to you, Zach. What are you studying?
Political science and business marketing.
Fantastic. All right, what's your question?
My question is this, and also I'd love to have a debate, just all out, anytime, Oxford style if you'd like. I understand how I'm willing to do that. But my question is this. We all know the best way to reduce prices in this economy is to increase competition. How in the world can a private corporation providing insurance compete with an entity that does not have to worry about making a profit, does not have to pay local property taxes? They do not have to. They're not subject to local regulations. How can a company compete with that? And I'm not looking for anything I don't want generalities. I don't want philosophical arguments. I'm just asking a question.
That's a great question. Thank you for the question. I think there are ways that we can address those competitive issues. And you're absolutely right. If they're not entirely addressed, then that raises a set of legitimate problems. But the only point I wanted to make